Alexander Hartdagen, a brilliant professor, loses his fiancée, Emma, and decides to create a time machine to try to save her. It's a daring plan. Get ready, and let's go. On an ordinary morning at the vibrant Columbia University in New York, the academic environment is marked by the notable presence of Dr. Alexander, a well-known figure in the hallways. However, the doctor's deep dedication to his research causes him to completely forget an appointment with his girlfriend, Emma. Back at his home, which also serves as his laboratory, he prepares for an important meeting with his colleague, Philby. Philby, in turn, tries to convince Alexander to adopt a more traditional mindset and not to get so consumed by his extravagant theories and inventions. Alexander is distracted by a prototype automobile that malfunctions. The owner offers him a ride, but Alexander declines, though he hesitates slightly. Later, in Emma's presence, Alexander appears visibly nervous, his hands trembling as he mentally rehearses what he is about to say. Summoning his courage, and with his heart racing, he proposes to Emma with a ring. She accepts with a radiant smile. However, the celebration is abruptly interrupted when a thief emerges from the shadows of a nearby forest, demanding that they hand over everything they have. Emma, reluctant to give up her new ring, stands her ground against the assailant, who becomes more aggressive. A tense struggle unfolds, and in a tragic, shocking moment, Emma is shot at point-blank range, dying in Alexander's arms. 4 years after this defining event, we find an Alexander even more immersed in his scientific studies, an obsession that begins to worry Mrs. Watchett, his housekeeper, and Philby, who desperately tries to get him to abandon his melancholy and move on. Alexander's deep grief eventually drives Philby away. In a moment of revelation, Alexander shares his most extraordinary invention, a time machine, with which he plans to reverse Emma's cruel fate. The machine, operating with precision, takes him back to that fateful night. The reunion with Emma, still alive, fills his heart with joy. Aware of the events that would soon follow, he chooses to avoid the forest path, guiding Emma towards the safety of the city. Along the way, he sees the same prototype car pass by but ignores it, focusing entirely on protecting Emma. She, sensing a change in his behavior, questions his intentions, but he only urges her to go home and stay safe. After exchanging words laden with emotion, he entrusts his beloved to the care of his past self, saving her from a premature death before departing. He stopped to buy the flowers he had promised Emma. The flower shop was filled with a gentle aroma. However, as he chose the perfect bouquet, a scream pierced the air, followed by the deafening sound of a crash. Outside, Emma was hit by a speeding car and died instantly. The tragedy fell upon Alexander like a heavy veil, but instead of succumbing to sadness, he found himself perplexed. Life, cruel and ironic, seemed determined to keep their paths forever crossed. With a heavy heart, he decided his only option was another journey in the time machine, this time to New York in the year 2030, a future where humanity had already taken its first steps toward the stars, colonizing the moon. At the New York Public Library, Alexander encounters Vox, a holographic assistant that glows with an enigmatic blue light and claims to have all the knowledge of the world at his disposal. Impressed, Alexander inquires about time travel, but is met with a digital laugh. To Vox, time travel is pure fiction, and Alexander is mentioned only as a visionary novelist, not a traveler. Frustrated at not being taken seriously, he decides to go even further into the future, to the year 2370, a time ravaged by environmental disasters. Upon arrival, he is greeted by rescue workers who inform him of the tragic fate of the moon, destroyed by a catastrophe caused by its own lunar colony. The event had devastating repercussions for Earth. Panicking, Alexander runs to his time machine, but in his haste he trips, hitting his head and unintentionally launching himself into an even more distant future. He awakens in the year 802,701, rescued by a group of indigenous people who care for him with natural remedies and great patience. Among these saviors is a curious boy who watches him closely. When he finally regains consciousness, Alexander realizes he is in a community of rustic huts clinging to the mountainsides. His presence is quite a surprise to the tribe, whose curiosity seems mixed with a slight distrust. Mara, a young woman from the tribe, speaks to him in an ancient language that sounds like the clashing of stones. She explains that everyone there learns to speak this language in childhood, but forgets it as they grow older. The village chief suggests that Alexander be thrown into the river to solve the problem of his strange presence, but Mara intervenes. She argues that he is just a confused traveler who hit his head. Her intervention allows Alexander to remain with the tribe without further incident. Later, around a campfire under the starry sky, he shares stories of his world, particularly fascinating Kin, Mara's brother, with tales of technologies and cultures from a distant time. They welcome Alexander, offering him a space in their home to rest for the night. Meanwhile, Mara reveals that her parents migrated elsewhere, hinting at the profound changes the world has undergone. The sight of a shattered moon in the sky, surrounded by a ring of orbital debris, astonishes Alexander, highlighting how drastic the transformations have been. Curious, he asks why the boats are taken out of the water at night, initially assuming it to be a measure against theft. Mara, however, seems unfamiliar with the term stolen, and instead suggests that they pick flowers in the forest the following day. A dark feeling grips the atmosphere, culminating in a nightmare where Alexander encounters a sinister skull-shaped monument. However, it's just a bad dream from which he awakens startled. Kin is also disturbed by bad dreams and is comforted by his sister. When Alexander shares the details of his nightmare with Mara, she reveals that such dreams are common among them, a phenomenon experienced by everyone in their community. Curious, Alexander mentions the word Morlock, but Mara dismisses it as a mere children's tale. The next day, he observes how the tribe preserves fragments of the ancient cities, keeping them as relics. Mara questions his reasons for traveling through time, to which he explains that he seeks to understand the unchangeable nature of the past. She struggles to grasp this concept until she gradually realizes it is an attempt to recover something irretrievable. During a canoe ride, Alexander asks about the absence of elderly people in the village, and Mara replies that they chose to leave, opting not to live confined to the past. Arriving at a field filled with windmills, they are warmly greeted by Kin, who eagerly listens to more stories about New York in the ancient times. Amidst this exchange of experiences, Mara, upon finding the time machine, makes an unexpected and urgent request for Alexander to take her brother to the past. Confused by such a request, Alexander barely has time to process the situation when distant screams and rumblings alert them to imminent danger to the village. As they approach, they find the villagers in a desperate flight. A humanoid figure, resembling a monkey, suddenly emerges, forcing Alexander to seek shelter. Soon, more of these creatures attack, armed with darts carrying a black viscous substance akin to tar. Before he can investigate further, he and the villagers find themselves surrounded by these entities, which burst from the ground with overwhelming force and primitive hunting techniques. The wild beasts brutally bound the villagers, capturing them one by one. In the chaos, one of the monstrous creatures fixated on Kin, lunging at him voraciously. Seeing this, Alexander didn't hesitate. He rushed to the boy's aid. In the frantic chase, Alexander found himself desperately clinging to one of the windmills as the creature tried to drag him by the legs. After an intense and fierce struggle, the beast was thrown to the ground, where it lay unconscious for a few moments. However, the creature quickly recovered, and upon awakening, dragged Alexander back into the fight. It was then that Kin heroically intervened, using fire to repel the beast, allowing them both to escape through hidden tunnels beneath the sand. Upon returning to the village, Alexander received the distressing news that Mara had been taken to the creature's lair. He immediately proposed a rescue mission, but the villagers seemed resigned, as if the abduction was a normal part of life in that region. Frustrated by their apparent apathy, Alexander confronted the village leader, who explained that those who fought back were usually the first to be captured. Unwilling to accept this, Alexander spoke with Kin, urging him to take action. Kin revealed that the creatures were known as Morlocks, and emphasized that once captured by them, one rarely returned. Despite this grim reality, Kin mentioned a mysterious place inhabited by ghosts and agreed to take Alexander there after nightfall. Upon arrival, they found a space filled with ancient relics and deactivated Vox holograms, which Alexander remembered seeing in a museum. Although Vox could no longer update its system, it revealed the existence of two dominant species on Earth, one living above ground and the other below. Vox, now with a more cynical consciousness, lamented its inability to intervene in the world despite all its knowledge. Recalling Alexander's previous visit, Vox told him that a villager had escaped from the Morlocks and spent time with him, sharing stories and experiences. Pressing for more information, Alexander was warned by Vox about the harsh reality that awaited him. Vox then gave a crucial clue, mentioning that the Morlocks came from the east. Determined, Alexander headed east and encountered a macabre monument made of skulls, reminiscent of his worst nightmares. Resolute, he continued, descending a steep cliff until he found the entrance to a cave. Inside, he discovered advanced technology far beyond the capabilities of the surface villagers. Discreetly following a pair of Morlocks, Alexander explored their sophisticated underground society, with its advanced metallurgy and a grim chamber that resembled a butcher's shop, filled with torture instruments and a pile of personal clothing. Among them, Mara's necklace, a sign that she was somewhere in those dark depths. While exploring the unfamiliar environment, Alexander accidentally triggered a lever that caused him to plummet into a pit filled with human remains. Quickly captured by the Morlocks, he was imprisoned in a dark cell. This subterranean dungeon revealed itself to be vast, and after descending a sinister staircase, Mara was seen trapped in a cage, with an imposing figure seated on a throne before her. This figure was the Uber Morlock, the supreme leader of the tribe, who explained the division of humanity into two factions after the destruction of the moon: those who live on the surface and those who dwell in the depths. The Morlocks, according to him, are divided into castes. Some are the brains, others the muscle, and all are controlled through telepathy. The Morlocks capture humans from the surface to consume them, reserving only a few, the fittest, to transform into new Morlocks. The Uber Morlock uses his telepathic abilities to control the Morlocks, preventing them from rapidly consuming the available humans. He delves into Alexander's memories, accusing him of hypocrisy for criticizing his way of life, while he himself disturbs nature with his time travels. At the back of the room, Alexander sees his old watch and is suddenly transported to his former laboratory, filled with time machine projects, where he finds Emma and the children he never had. The Uber Morlock explains the impossibility of altering the past. Emma's death led Alexander to invent the time machine. Without her death, the machine would not exist, creating an unavoidable temporal paradox. The creature then shows him the time machine and offers it, along with his watch. However, upon taking the watch, Alexander seizes the moment to grab the Uber Morlock, initiating a confrontation. During the struggle, he activates the time machine, but the Uber Morlock's strength is overwhelming. In a desperate move, Alexander breaks a valve on the machine, distracting the Uber Morlock and leaving him out of the machine's reach, causing him to age rapidly until he turns to dust. Finally safe, Alexander checks the date on the machine and finds himself in a grim year, revealing a future devastated and dominated by the Morlocks. Determined, he makes his final choice. He returns to the year 802,701 to rescue Mara. Using his watch to block the time machine's mechanism, he plans his final escape, committed to changing what he can of the dark future he had witnessed. Alexander and Mara, united, faced the remaining Morlocks in the underground labyrinths. In a desperate act, Alexander activated an unknown function of the machine, triggering a devastating temporal wave that quickly aged the hostile creatures until they disintegrated into dust. With the Morlocks eliminated, the pair managed to escape the dark tunnels, emerging to the surface with their hearts relieved, although Mara expressed sadness over the loss of the time machine. Alexander, however, was calm, accepting that he had finally left his tumultuous past behind and was now embracing a new beginning. Back in the village, life continued with a newfound peace, and the days were filled with stories of the past told by Vox, who still retained the ability to enchant listeners with tales of the old world. Alexander found comfort in sharing memories of his old laboratory with Mara and Kin, reliving adventures and episodes with his former friends. In these conversations, he recalled how Philby, in a parallel reality, told Mrs. Watchett about his happiness that Alexander had finally found a place where he belonged. Philby, ever pragmatic, took the opportunity to resolve everyday matters, mentioning to Mrs. Watchett that he and his wife would need a new housekeeper. With her usual efficiency, she accepted the offer, committing to stay until Mr. Alexander decided to return, keeping a spark of hope for their reunion. At the moment of his departure, Philby, emotional and grateful for his friend's journey, tossed his hat into the air in a gesture of homage and farewell, symbolizing the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another in the story of their lives. If you enjoyed this film, I recommend watching this one as well. I guarantee you'll like it. See you there.